Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever in the world you might be. I am Nicole BC, and you know everything. Welcome. Hello. How are you? Wherever in the world you may be. I'm re-recording this very last minute, hence the presentation. But you know what? We had a very successful year on Spotify, according to Wrapped. So it doesn't matter what I look like. It only matters what I talk about. These dulcimer tones reverberating through your headphones, most likely, potentially your car speakers. I would be surprised if anyone were listening to this in any other analog audio format, but kudos to you. And thank you, because I wouldn't have made the leaps and bounds I did in the podcasting verse without you. So I just wanted to say I appreciate you. And it's hilarious that I am re-recording this, breaking all of my own presentation rules, very last minute. My first loop of the year was also the second Friday of the year because life happens. And this episode is all about building in chaos. We're going to talk a little bit about why that's so hard, but how that actually makes the biggest difference. And I also like the breakdown that I wanted to discuss. I shared some story times. You know, I got back into like old BZ because we got real down the rabbit hole with that fantasy save series. And this episode followed the last of that series, the first episode of this year, The Neverending Story. And that author, that narrative was really designed to help us remember you got to get in it. Like, you can't just play to win. You got to play the fucking game. You got to stop watching from the sidelines. And I know that's easier to say than do, but that's why I make this podcast, because it is my art. I can't talk to you about building and creating and launching and hiring and establishing and selling if I'm not doing it myself, right? And I really do believe that art saves. I really, really do think those authors that we spent the last few months discussing, those tomes of fantasy, were blueprints for how to overcome the impossible. When it feels like the system is rigged, and it is, when it feels like there is no pathway to success, when you use your imagination, when you truly dream, when you create for the sake of creating, that's how you create the win-win-win. One where you don't have to sacrifice or martyr yourself. One where you don't have to get into some weird trauma drama triangle. And I went on this big tirade in the last episode. I think we're just going to get into it because now I have like 16 different tabs open and I'm trying to kind of recreate something that was magic in the moment. And that's not the point, right? We're here right now. It was an awesome podcast. We're going to recreate something together. So thank you. Thank you for bearing with me while we do this. The reason this episode I think matters even more than when I recorded it in the moment is we had some crazy fucking things go down in the world, depending on when you're listening to this. I do like that this is also time travel. You could be listening to this in any year and any time. And yet we're intersecting on the space-time continuum in this moment. And that's pretty fucking cool. But if you remember January 2026, we had some gasoline added to the dumpster fire of our fucking world, including us picking a fight with Venezuela, of all people. The very obvious agenda of our beef with Greenland, you know, that squeaky wheel. God, I mean, that's like not even, that's just American news. I realize there's a whole fucking world spinning here. Let's just like say a prayer for Taiwan. I mean, this system is going to consume you if you don't imagine another way possible. And I also spent the weekend doing just that with a couple of pretty amazing co-creators in a, shall we say, ceremonial space. And what became brutally obvious is we are using the old rules and we are using the old systems to try and create something new. And that ain't going to work. It does all need to come apart, but we can take those pieces and start building something new together. You can't beat the man by screaming at him. He fucking loves that. It validates him. Like, it actually proves he still owns you if you are fighting the man all day long, every day. I truly believe we will win, not just by imagining another way possible, but by doing small, incremental actions, by embodying this ethereal hope and making change with every single step that we take, every decision that we make, every word that we say. We are casting this spell. We refuse the man's game by playing our own. And I've talked so much about this in terms of being the king or queen of your own castle, of writing your own manifesto, of really finding out, like, what do you believe in and what are you willing to do to prove it? The system is always going to be bigger and stronger and richer and younger and hotter and more connected and better staffed. Like, if winning requires brute force, or it's a measurement of resources, we've already lost. David didn't beat Goliath in a weightlifting contest. He refused the contest. He chose range and speed and precision. He played to his strengths, his innate advantages. And that's what we're going to talk about today. And as much as we would love to give this to the man, his advantage is not strength, it's control. And this thread was pulled through every single one of those books we talked about in the Quantum Business Book Club over the last few months. In negotiation research, the agenda is treated as a structural power lever. It shapes what gets discussed, in what order, and on what timeline. In politics or in economics, this agenda setting can be so powerful that the agenda setter effectively dictates the outcome of this negotiation. So when people say, I can't win, the question has to become, what game are you playing? Why are you choosing to play this game? Who created the scoreboard? And what's the time frame? If you didn't choose those things, you are being controlled by them, the man, the system. There are ways you can create an asymmetrical advantage. I'm gonna get into the story time. When I very first moved to Australia, I've told the story a few times. I was full of chutzpah. Actually, that's not true. I was full of chutzpah when I first moved there, but by the time this story rolled around, I was deeply insecure. I was starting a business. I was starting a record label. I had no money. I had no connections. I had no history, which meant I had no street cred. All I had was a bunch of like really weird, crazy, like post-hardcore sort of noise bands that preferred playing in warehouses than on stages and kind of thought money was everything that we're talking about. And I knew that this whole exploration for me was solving a problem. I had a recording studio. I needed to record bands to pay for the rent and equipment within the recording studio, and ideally myself and my business partner at the time, who were producers and engineers. And in order to derive income from our art, we needed to work with more established artists. And those artists needed to be deriving income from their art, which meant they needed to be selling records. And I thought, hey, I have some experience doing this. I used to call 300 record stores a day and independently ship them records for the artists that I used to look after. And if the artists were touring, and they were hippies, so they were always touring, I would call up the local shops And I would say, hey, do you have these albums? And they would say, no, we don't. And I would say, can I send you 5? You may sell them. And then I will call you again and I will ask you for money for those records. In exchange, I would love to send you some posters and some t-shirts and give you some guest passes because this band is going to be playing in your town. And they were like, this all sounds like a really great idea. And we developed a relationship, and eventually that became our record label back in the day. So I decided that since Australia only had 300 record stores, I could probably handle this. And then I just needed to have records to sell and bands that were touring. And as I grew that, I realized this is a lot of work for one person. And what would make this easier and more cost effective is distribution, because when you have a distribution deal, you are able to plug into a much larger group of labels and then leverage their manufacturing power. So instead of me trying to make 500 records, I could place my manufacturing into an order of 5 million records, which made my price per unit much cheaper. And there used to be these old directories. They were called phone books. And in the 1900s, what that meant was it was a book, which is a tangible collection of words. Actually, most of you are probably born in the 1900s, but for those of you not, these were ye olden day pieces of technology that we used to get things done. And this, you could pay a lot of money for these different industry books in music. And some were record labels, some were venues, some were publicists, some were booking agents. And so depending on what it is you needed, you could buy one of these books for a lot of money and then access the people that you wanted to be connected with in order to do business. And so there was a whole bunch of independent record labels. Cool. I was one of those. I was like, nah, I need distribution. There were a couple of distribution labels and I was like, if I'm going to do this, if I'm going to partner with somebody, like, if they had some like leverage and some brand, that would be really helpful. And in Australia at the time, there was 4 major record labels that were present, and Sony Records was doing something really cool with this new distribution arm called Red Label, and it had a bunch of of the cooler kind of alt labels on it. And I was like, huh. And I saw the CEO's phone number of Sony Records, and I thought, whatever, I'm going to give this guy a call. He's not going to answer his phone. Obviously, I come from the land of America, where you have minions that gatekeep access to people who can actually make decisions and make shit happen. So I figured I would just need to be really nice to some intern or potentially probably very attractive young female for reasons hopefully cancel culture has since solved or addressed. But I am good at a few things: working really hard and being passionate. And so I combined those two to create this plan for this record label. So I had a business plan. I also had a marketing plan. I also had a touring plan. I also had a publicity and promotions plan. And I had budgets for all of these things because, again, that just helps me work. And it also helps me work with a lot of different people. So we can all talk about doing crazy ass shit and all kind of know what's expected. And so armed with these plans and some chutzpah and the false sense that this would never work, which actually can give you a lot of confidence, I picked up the phone and I dialed this phone number. And the person said, "Hello, this is Dennis." And I went, "Oh, fuck, you're the CEO of Sony Records." And he said, "May I help you?" Because that actually came out of my mouth, which I'm sure is not hard for you to believe. And I said, "I represent a handful of Sydney artists. We have an independent record label. We're looking for a distribution deal." And he said, "Not sure that I've heard of any of your bands. Can you send me something?" And I said, "Let me send you my plan." Send him the business plan, send him the one sheets, which are these promo documents, blah, 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 it doesn't matter. Send him the marketing plan, the touring plan, etc. And he was like, "Oh, this looks great. I'm sure we can make this happen," and forward me on to said minion. And that was literally as hard as it was. It took about 5 minutes and the deal was essentially inked. I share this to say I used my own strengths to leverage asymmetric advantage. And this positioned me in a way that leapfrogged my reputation, my success and financial success, but also suddenly I had street cred. Suddenly I became somebody that people wanted to talk to, that people wanted to partner with, that bands wanted to work with. It absolutely solved the problem in my recording studio. It solved a lot of problems for the bands that I was working with. And it showed me that when you lean into your strengths and you give up trying to be good at everything, which I had definitely been doing up until that moment, strange, funny things happen. Just for the record, I was also the laughing stock of quite a few music offices because I kept sending them the CDs that I was printing with the promo that I was doing. And they were like, this is wild stuff. And I remember a very good friend of mine telling me, a few years ago when you sent out your promo packs, we used to use them as Frisbees and we could laugh about it. But he remembered that. And then he rented an office from me. So take from that what you will. There are 6 levers of asymmetric advantage: terrain, pace, score, range, surprise, and speed. I'm going to get into each of those with you. And while I'm dissecting them, think about what you've got. You have one, I promise. It's a surprise at the very fucking least. No, it's not for me to tell you. But, sometimes I share tips and tricks and hacks and potentialities with people. And they're like, that doesn't apply to me. And it's like, that's where we go back to that imagination. And a coaching hack, a coaching cheat code to say to somebody who feels absolutely hopeless, really stuck in that level 1, 2, if you know, you don't have to believe me, but just pretend. Imagine you own all 6 of these leverage points. What would they look like for you? Terrain, the first one. This is where you ask, like, what do I do a little bit differently? What do I do, or where do I play, or how, like, very physically, geographically, industry wise, like, what is your kind of literal corner of the market? I'm not asking you to like niche down here so much as think about like geographically, locale, intimacy, sort of prolific. How easy is it for you to like actually create? That could be speed, right? Where can you play that others can't easily follow? That's what I mean by terrain. Pace. So one of the things the system can generally do is outpace, let's just say small business as an example. Like you can get something on Amazon quicker than you can from like the mom and pop shop down the street from you. That's probably not the best example, but I think you get what I'm trying to say, right? The system loves urgency because it kills discernment. I know how many things you've gotten on Amazon that were complete shit for a variety of reasons. Lean into that as a creator, as a provider, as a doer. Win by choosing your pace. That could mean a lot of different things. I can feel your imagination going. So I'm going to move on to the third, the score. Stop measuring yourself by numbers that reward obedience. You'll often see, especially on web pages, people claiming like, I've done 10,000 ... because of that, like you need 10,000 whatever to be a master. Okay. What if you did one better than anybody else? What if a friend of mine teaches people how to do 100-mile races? I don't think a lot of his, well, I'd be speaking out of school if I talked about his client results, but he hadn't run a 100-mile race in a really long time. What he did do was pacing. So he would do the night shift, the 12 a.m. to 6 a.m. shift, and just run with people. And he didn't need to train. He could just show up and run. And he kind of realized that's like a really special talent to be able to run 30 miles in the middle of the night for funsies, like just to be a good guy. And so he leveraged that. You just need one example. You don't have to have the most. You don't have to have the highest. You get to make up the metrics for what you believe you should be measured for. That's what I mean by score. And if you use theirs, firstly, you're comparing yourself. I'm helping a client with a software migration right now, and she keeps telling me what all of the other businesses in her industry do. She's in the top 1%. Please do not use what the other 99% of businesses are doing because they're doing worse than you. Why the fuck would we use them as a metric? Create your own scoreboard. Range. So what I mean by range is that example of David and Goliath. David chose range. And I think this is going to be a big one moving forward because AI is there, right? For a long time, we had to be generalists, and this was in ye olden days. And then somewhere around like the technology revolution, say like 80s till now, you needed to be the specialist. Like you needed to be the only one. But now you got to kind of be both. And you need tools that you can leverage that allow you to show up at least as good as everybody else, AKA the all rounder, and also be able to provide a depth that is unique. That's what I mean by range. Your version of distribution, of partnerships, of your network. Like, how do you mycelially connect with what you do? That's what I mean by range. It's a little bit of speed, but also a little bit of agility and also a little bit of creativity in David's example. When you kind of look at like your entire offering, who you are, how you do it, where you do it, when you do it, what's brought you to this moment, where you could potentially go, who you're working with, who's vertically connected to you, who's horizontally connected to you, like that whole organic compound. That's your range. Surprise. The system plans on predictable opponents. Be less predictable. Drop your album day of without any fucking promo. Do a pop-up. Do, follow your bliss. Like if it lights you up, make it happen. I was watching the Beatles anthology last night, and that first movie that they made, It's Been a Hard Day's Night, they worked with a comedy director. That didn't make any sense. They just wanted to be funny. And that's how they essentially made their first, quote unquote movie. It's sort of like a string of music videos. But like, I'm pretty sure Beyonce bit that and did it her way. That's surprise. And then lastly, speed. Not move fast and break things, thanks tech bros, but more like learn fast, adapt, regenerate. So not just pivot, but like I was talking about at the beginning, everything is breaking down, which means we have a ton of material to build from. You don't need to throw the baby out with the bathwater. There is a lot of value in all of the systems and all of the structures that have been, and we can use that as foundation upon which we erect the scaffolding to start building. And we don't have to have a blueprint for that. That's what I mean by speed. Strength is overrated. Adaptation is undefeated. I'm going to use a few case studies besides my own personal stories that I thought were interesting when I put it through this very specific lens, because they were all underdogs. Like none of them made any sense until they did. And now they are the market leader. We have Netflix versus Blockbuster. Now, again, some of you may not have been born in the 1900s, but Netflix started off as a DVD rental service. And then they moved into those, this is another yield and day, vending machines. So you could like go to your grocery store and like put your credit card in and get like DVD from a fucking vending machine. Their shtick was no late fees. So Blockbuster was the place to be. Am I right? Like I would literally hang out there on Friday nights. Also, I think we all know, mega nerd. I was telling one of my friends about my penchant for comic reading and asking him if he had read comics. And he literally said, no, BZ, I was cool and had sex with girls. And I was like, of course you did. Huh. Everything made a lot more sense after that little comment. But to get it back on track, Blockbuster was a physical store and it had late fees. And you would like wait for people to return their videos, especially when it was like a popular movie. Netflix decided to change the game. They said, hey, we will do mail delivery because maybe you don't have a Blockbuster near you. We will do subscription so you get the new movies regularly, and we won't charge late fees. They leaned into convenience. Their range was anywhere. Their surprise was subscriptions. I'm not going to play through everything because I forgot to do that in advance, but you get where I'm going with it, right? At its peak, Netflix DVD service had 20 million subscribers and over 100,000 titles. And we all know where Netflix went with that. And bye-bye Blockbuster. They filed for bankruptcy in 2010. RIP. Stop competing on the incumbent's advantage. Compete on friction removal. What is your ideal client's biggest complaint about all of your potential competitors, or about your industry at large, or about your community? That is a real opportunity. I don't know if you remember Southwest Airlines before they became a little bit cliche and have also now introduced like you buy a ticket for a seat, but they were the scrappy underdog. They stayed consistently profitable for decades in an industry where that is notoriously challenging. And they did it by designing an operating system that their competitors were simply not built to copy. They used different routes, they used different cost structures, and they had a very different culture. You will never out-brand the giants. You out-design them by design. Build an operating system that makes you cheaper or faster or easier or even more challenging to replicate. Can you make your disruption, how you disrupt your industry, your offering, your client base, your customers, the system, the man, can you make that innovation a repeatable pattern? Different is only better if you can do it again. So starting with something that is actually simpler, actually cheaper, actually more accessible, then moving up market, this is how you displace the man. You change the terms of engagement, not as a strategy, but as your way of being and doing. So this is about adaptation, not as a skill set, but as a personality trait. You know, in 2020, pivot was, I think, the word of the year. This is now recognizing the whole point is to pivot. Nothing is going to last forever. We should bake that into our planning. This will have a life cycle. And rather than trying to beat a dead horse, it's like, how can we, that would be a dark metaphor that I'm not going to play through. Rather than pretending like we're going to be doing this forever, plan on it not lasting as long as like, so that you're taking it through some like zombie state. Because when you plan for the end, firstly, you are in witness of the cycle. But secondly, again, you can take those materials and compost them. And you can say, hey, well, we go dormant here. We're going to take everything learned and gained and reinvest that into the beginning of something new. And probably better, not because it eclipses what was before, but because it's more relevant now. It's more useful now. We've taken these efficiencies and now we're able to optimize and not, again, bring that to the same thing, but cheaper, but bring it to something entirely new, solving a problem in an even more inventive and innovative way. This is, I don't know if you've seen, like for a minute there, everyone was doing like improv classes, but there's a reason why improvisation training has shown to improve divergent thinking. And this is the ability to generate more solutions and tolerate uncertainty better. Adaptation is the name of the game. And the system is essentially frozen. It is in that, you know, everyone keeps talking about late stage capitalism. This is what I mean by like beating the dead horse, like plan for the end. And if we listening, you and me discussing this ish right now can go, oh yeah, this was all supposed to happen. Suddenly that to me feels exciting. Like maybe I know something everybody else doesn't. Maybe this isn't a problem. And don't get me wrong, I am very the fuck aware of exactly, well, and as much as any privileged white chick in the fucking America could be. But like, you know what I'm saying? I'm not trying to solve all of the world's problems. I'm trying to offer you a light at the end of the tunnel. And it's like the tunnel's going to end. It's supposed to end. No, that's the nature of the tunnel. What do you do with that? Now that you can see that light, what does that mean for you? So here's a few takeaways that I hope are useful. And just as a kind of reminder and wrap up, ask yourself, what game am I playing? Who set the rules? What's the score? What are we even measuring? What am I being asked to optimize? And which of those terms could I change to leverage my advantage? Terrain, pace, score, range, surprise, and speed. You have an advantage. You have a handful of opportunities. Always. Those are the fucking rules. I've said fuck a lot in this episode. I'm back. So don't change your product or your marketing. Maybe change the offer. Like, what is the problem you're trying to solve? Maybe there's a different problem the exact same thing can solve. Instead of redoing all of the messaging, just try it on a different platform. Maybe Instagram ain't your place. Maybe you're more of a YouTube girly. Don't measure output, measure input. How many, how much, how often, how intentional, how excited? These are the questions to be asking in this new world of business building. And absolutely change your pace, change the timeline. Maybe this game isn't 45 minutes. Maybe you're going into overtime. Maybe you're looking at the whole season. Maybe you're looking at the lifetime. And you forgot, like, you're just in one quarter or the first set. Never ever change your dream, my friend. You can dream bigger than the man. Your dream is more powerful than the system. It's not stronger, but it can change everything. You haven't lost because you're weak, and you didn't lose because you're playing a rigged game. By perceiving your win, you can stop yelling at the man and trying to fight the system. You actually build the door, or maybe you climb the wall, because you realize those boundaries were never the point. Imagine, play, fantasize. That's going to be your blueprint. That's going to be your map, despite everything that's fucking happening right now. So yeah, next episode, we're going to talk a little bit more about you. I do hope this season, I realize there's not actual seasons, and like the whole Spotify wrap up thing, I was like, oh, cool. We're like one of the top video podcasts and we have 800% more listeners. Wow. Thanks. Thanks again. Me talking about scores and metrics, right? I never actually look at like listenership or downloads or any of that because I legitimately don't care. And that's not why I'm doing this. But it did remind me it's okay if my hair looks like shit. So that was useful for today. Oh, I lost my train of thought by talking shit about myself. That probably means we're supposed to be done. So I'm going to finish. But, we're going to talk about talking shit about yourself, because that might not be that helpful. Also could potentially be a really interesting avenue for growth. I guess you'll have to listen next week to find out. Okay, I love you. Bye.